Grief is a thief. It steals your breath, your appetite, your ability to sleep. But worst of all, it steals your memories. For the first 3 months after I lost Liam, every memory I had of our 8 years together was tainted, overexposed by the harsh, brutal light of his absence. The way he'd smile over his morning coffee, the sound of his key in the lock at the end of the day, the comfortable weight of his arm around me in the dark, it all played on a loop in my mind. A beautiful film that now had a tragic, unbearable ending. Liam was my anchor. I was a freelance illustrator, a creature of quiet spaces and chaotic creativity. He was a structural engineer, a man who dealt in logic and stress loads and foundational integrity. He was the calm, steady blueprint to my messy, colorful art. Our love was a quiet, comfortable thing, built on shared dreams and a deep, unspoken understanding. We had a beautiful apartment overlooking the city, a life filled with friends, travel, and the easy rhythm of two people who were utterly, completely in sync. The accident was as senseless as it was sudden, a patch of black ice on a mountain road. During a weekend hiking trip, a single tragic moment of physics and bad luck. The police said he died instantly. One moment he was there, a vibrant, living presence in the world, and the next he was just a collection of memories, a box of belongings, a gaping, silent hole in my life. The task of sorting through his things was a special kind of torture. Every object was a landmine of memory. His favorite worn sweater that still smelled faintly of his cologne, the stack of travel guides for the trip to Japan we were planning, his collection of vintage vinyl records. I was the curator of a museum dedicated to a life that had been abruptly canceled. It was during this process, on a gray Tuesday afternoon, when the silence in the apartment was particularly loud, that I found the keys. They were in the back of his sock drawer, a place I had already looked a dozen times. Tucked into a small velvet pouch I'd never seen before, there were 3 of them. They were old-fashioned, ornate, and utterly unfamiliar. One was a small brass key with an intricate filigreed head. The second was a standard silver-colored key, but with a number stamped into it, P01138. The third was heavy iron, almost medieval-looking with a complex, jagged cut. I stared at them, a flicker of confusion cutting through the fog of my grief. These weren't our house keys, or the keys to our storage unit, or the key to his office. I knew every key on his main ring. These were different. These were secrets that my first thought was innocent, a surprise perhaps. A gift he had hidden for my upcoming birthday. Maybe a key to a new art studio he was planning to rent for me. The thought brought a fresh wave of tears. Even in death, he was taking care of me. But as the days turned into weeks, the keys began to feel less like a gift and more like a puzzle. A loose thread in the perfect tapestry of the life I felt we shared. Liam was not a man for secrets. He was open, honest to a fault. The idea of him having a hidden part of his life, a locked door I didn't know about, felt fundamentally wrong. It didn't fit the man I knew. Or rather, the man I thought I knew. My best friend, Sarah, tried to be practical. They're probably just old keys from his parents' house, Chloe, she said, trying to soothe the obsessive curiosity that had begun to take root in my mind. You're grieving. It's normal to fixate on small things. But I couldn't let it go. The keys sat on my kitchen counter, a silent, metallic question mark. They were the last piece of him I had to discover, the final chapter of a book that had been slammed shut too soon. I felt that if I could just figure out what they unlocked, I would somehow understand his death better, that I would find some final piece of him to hold on to. I had no idea that I was right. I had no idea that those keys wouldn't lead me to a final, comforting piece of him, but to a truth so monstrous it would make me wish I had never found them at all. The secret they unlocked wasn't a gift or surprise. It was the worst part. It was the realization that the man I was mourning had never truly existed. The obsession with the keys became my new anchor. It was a project, a mission that gave my grief-stricken days a sense of purpose. I started with the most straightforward clue, the silver key stamped with P01138, a post office box dot. It took me a week of calling different post office branches around the city before I found it. The box was registered at a small, dusty branch in a neighborhood on the other side of town, a place Liam had no reason to ever visit. The clerk, a weary-looking woman with a kind face, was hesitant to give me access. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said apologetically. Policy is policy. Only the registered owner or someone with a key can open the box. I held up the key. His name was Liam Callahan, I said, my voice trembling slightly. He was my partner. He passed away 3 months ago. I'm trying to settle his affairs. I produced a copy of his death certificate, my hand shaking as I slid it across the counter. The woman's expression softened with pity. She looked from the certificate to my face, and then she nodded. Okay, honey, she said softly. Let's see what's in there. She led me to a wall of small brass-fronted boxes. She unlocked 1138 and pulled out a thin stack of envelopes. They were all addressed to a name that was not Liam Callahan. They were addressed to Mr. James Alastair. My heart did a slow, painful somersault in my chest. I'm sorry, I said to the clerk. There must be a mistake. This isn't his name. The key opens the box, honey, she said gently. This is who the mail is for. I took the envelopes, my mind reeling. Back in my car, I stared at the name, James Alastair. It meant nothing to me. The return addresses were all from utility companies, a credit card company, and a bank I didn't recognize. This wasn't just a secret post office box. This was a secret identity. The next key I tackled was the small, ornate brass one. It looked like a key to a piece of furniture, or perhaps a jewelry box. I spent a full day trying it on every lock in our apartment, on every old chest and box we had in storage. Nothing. Then I remembered the bank. Liam handled all our finances, but we had a joint safety deposit box at our local branch for important documents, our passports, the deed to the apartment, my parents' wedding rings. On a wild, desperate hunch, I went to the bank. The bank manager, a kind man who had helped us with our mortgage, expressed his condolences. I explained that I needed to access our box. He led me down to the vault. As he inserted his master key, I held up the small brass one. You know, I said, trying to sound casual. Liam was always so secretive about his personal effects. I found this key. I don't suppose it could be for another box here, could it? The manager frowned. That would be highly unusual, Mrs. Callahan. Your husband only had the one joint box registered with you. I'm sure you're right, I said. It's probably nothing. But as he pulled out our box, my eyes scanned the wall of metal doors. And I saw it. A few rows down, a box with a slightly different, more ornate lock, the kind my brass key might fit. Could I just try it? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, just to satisfy my curiosity. The manager looked hesitant, but then he sighed. He saw a grieving widow lost in the confusing aftermath of loss. Very well, he said. He took me to the other box. He inserted his key, and then I inserted mine. The lock turned. The small metal door swung open. Inside was a single, large manila envelope. My hands trembled as I opened it. It was filled with official documents, a birth certificate for James Alastair, a passport in the same name, but with Liam's photograph, his familiar, smiling face looking back at me, a ghost in a life I didn't recognize. And there was a life insurance policy, a massive one for $5 million. My name was listed as the sole beneficiary. For a moment, a wave of love and gratitude washed over me. Even in death, he was taking care of me. But then I saw the other document tucked behind it. It was another life insurance policy for the same amount. This one was in the name of James Alastair. The beneficiary was listed as Sophia Alastair, and the relationship was listed as wife. Wife. The word was a physical blow. The air rushed out of the small, sterile vault. I stumbled back, grabbing onto the wall for support. The bank manager rushed to my side, his face a mask of concern. Double quotes, Mrs. Callahan. Are you all right? But I couldn't answer. I was staring at the documents, at the proof of a life I never knew existed. Liam wasn't just my partner. He was someone else's husband. He had a wife. A whole other life running in parallel to mine, hidden behind a false name and a secret set of keys. The grief I had been feeling for the man I had lost was instantly replaced by a new, terrifying emotion, the realization that I had never known him at all. The man I had loved was a forgery, and I, his loving partner, was just one part of his. Collection. The drive home from the bank was a blur. My mind was a chaotic slideshow of images, Liam's face and the fake passport, the name, Sophia Alastair, on the insurance policy, the word wife, burning in my brain. I felt like a character in a spy novel, A life of mundane, happy domesticity revealed as a complex, sinister plot. Who was James Allister? Who was Sophia? Was she real? Was their marriage real? Was our life the lie, or was hers? I laid the documents out on my dining room table, the table where Liam and I had shared hundreds of meals. The evidence was undeniable. 2 names, 2 wives, 2 lives. My loving, stable partner was a bigamist, a con man of the highest, most intimate order. The grief I had felt was now curdling into a cold, hard anger. I wasn't just a widow. I was a victim. I was left with one final key, the heavy iron one. It didn't look like a key for a box or a piece of furniture. It looked like a key to a door, a very old, very solid door. For days I did nothing. I was paralyzed by the truth. The key sat on my counter, a dark, menacing promise of more secrets, more pain. A part of me wanted to throw it away, to stop digging, to try and salvage some shred of the happy memories I had of Liam. But I couldn't. I had to know. I had to see the whole lie in all its monstrous detail. The credit card statements for James. Alistair, which I had taken from the post office box, provided the next clue. There were recurring charges month after month for a parking garage on the west side of the city and a quiet, residential neighborhood of brownstones and tree-lined streets. It was an area I had no reason to ever visit. One rainy Saturday, I drove there. I found the parking garage. Using the credit card statement as a reference, I convinced the attendant that I was Mrs. Allister and that my husband had lost his monthly pass. The attendant, a bored teenager, barely looked up as he issued me a temporary one. I spent the next 2 hours walking the streets of that neighborhood, the heavy iron key in my hand. I tried it on the doors of dozens of old brownstone apartment buildings, my heart pounding with a mixture of dread and grim determination. I felt like a burglar trying to break into a life that was not my own, only to discover that it was, in a twisted way, partly mine. I found it on a quiet, leafy street. The key slid into the lock of a heavy, dark green door on the garden level of a beautifully maintained brownstone. It turned with a satisfying, sickening click. The door swung open. I stepped inside, and my whole reality collapsed for the second. Turned out the apartment was a mirror image of my own, not in its layout, but in its soul. It was filled with the same brand of minimalist furniture, the same taste in abstract art, the same collection of vintage jazz records. But the details were all wrong. The colors were different cool blues and grays instead of my warm earth tones. And the photographs were a gallery of my stolen life. There he was, Liam or James, smiling on a beach, his arm around a woman who was not me. She was beautiful with long, dark hair and a radiant smile. Sophia, there they were, raising champagne glasses on a balcony overlooking a city I didn't recognize. There they were, holding a baby. A baby. I stumbled backwards, my hand flying to my mouth. I walked into the small second bedroom. It was a nursery. A beautiful, sun-drenched room painted a soft yellow. A crib stood in the corner. A mobile of hand-carved wooden animals hung above it. On the wall, in large, playful letters, was a name, Leo. He had a child. A son. I sank onto the floor of the nursery, the air rushing out of my lungs. The betrayal was so profound, so complete. It was almost sublime in its cruelty. This wasn't just an affair. This wasn't just a double life. This was a whole other family, a whole other world he had built, a world where I didn't exist. He had a wife who loved him, a son who called him father. And he had me. I looked around. The silent, perfect apartment. Which one was the real one? Which life was the one he truly wanted? Or were we both just projects? 2 different versions of a life he was trying on like a suit to see which one fit best. As I sat there, surrounded by the evidence of his other life, a final, horrifying thought began to form in my mind. The insurance policies, one for me, one for her. It was a perfect, symmetrical betrayal. But what was the endgame? What was a man with 2 lives, 2 wives, and 2 massive insurance policies planning to do? The answer, when it came, was so cold and so logical it made me physically sick. You don't take out 2 policies unless you're planning on cashing one of them in. He wasn't just living 2 lives. He was planning on ending one of them. I fled the brownstone like a thief, my heart a wild, panicked bird in my chest. The knowledge of his other family, his son, was a wound far deeper than the initial betrayal. It recontextualized everything. Our quiet evenings, his business trips, the unexplained absences. It was all a carefully managed schedule, a balancing act between his two lives, his two families. For a week, I was a ghost in my own apartment, haunted by the image of the other woman, Sophia, and their child. I was consumed by a storm of conflicting emotions, rage, grief, and a strange, unwelcome flicker of jealousy. Who was she? Did she know about me? Was she a victim, just like me? Or was she a willing participant in this monstrous deception? I had to know. I had to see her, to look her in the eye. I had to understand my place in this twisted narrative. I went back to the brownstone. I didn't have a plan. I just knew I couldn't live another day in the dark. I sat in my car across the street, my hands gripping the steering wheel, watching her drive by the door. After 2 hours, she emerged. She was even more beautiful in person. She was pushing a stroller, and a small boy with Liam's sandy hair and a bright, infectious laugh was sitting in it. Leo. My heart ached with a pain so sharp it was difficult to breathe. She looked happy, content, a woman completely at ease in her life. She looked like me a year ago. I followed her. She went to a nearby park, a place filled with the laughter of children and the gentle murmur of mothers. She sat on a bench, her eyes full of love, fixed on her son as he played in the sandbox. I got out of my car and walked towards her, my legs feeling like they were made of lead. She looked up as I approached, a polite, questioning smile on her face. Sophia? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Her smile faltered, replaced by a look of confusion. Yes, I'm sorry, do I know you? My name is Chloe, I said. Chloe Callahan. I was Liam's partner. The name Liam meant nothing to her. Her expression remained blank. I'm sorry, she said gently. I think you have the wrong person. My husband's name is James Alistair. He is both names, I said, my voice gaining a hard, steady edge. I opened my purse and took out a photograph of Liam and me, taken at a friend's wedding just 6 months before he died. I handed it to her dot. She took the photograph, her brow furrowed. In confusion, she looked at the picture at Liam smiling in his tuxedo, his arm wrapped around me, and her face, her beautiful, happy face, collapsed. The color drained from her cheeks. Her hand flew to her mouth, and a small wounded sound escaped her lips. She looked from the photograph to my face, and her eyes filled with a dawning, horrified comprehension. No, she whispered. No, it can't be. We sat on that park bench for the next 2 hours, two strangers bound together by the same lie. We were the sun and the moon in the same man's sky, kept in separate orbits, never meant to meet. As she talked, my anger towards her dissolved, replaced by a profound, heartbreaking sense of solidarity. She was not my enemy. She was my fellow victim. Her story was a mirror image of mine. She had met James 9 years ago. He was a charming, successful financial analyst who swept her off her feet. He told her a tragic, compelling story about his past. He told her he was a widower, that his first wife, a brilliant but unstable artist, had died in a tragic accident. He said he had been forced to escape a controlling, wealthy family who had disapproved of their marriage. He had told her about, he called you his ghost. She wept, her voice breaking. He said you were his past, a painful memory he was trying to escape. He said your family still blamed him for your death, and that he had to be careful, that he had to use a different name for his work to avoid their harassment. I believed him. I felt sorry for him. I wanted to protect him from his past. He had used me as his cover story to build a new life with her, just as he had used her as his excuse for his absences in his life with me. It was a perfect, diabolical symmetry. Every business trip, every late night at the office was a carefully choreographed shift from one life to another, from one loving, unsuspecting woman to the other dot, as we pieced together the timeline of his lives. A final, even more sinister pattern began to emerge. Life insurance policies. He had taken them out on both of us within the same month. And then we found the travel documents dot in a drawer in her apartment. We found a folder. It contained 3 one-way tickets to Argentina, dated for the week after my birthday. The tickets were for James, Sophia, and Leo Alistair. There was also a bank statement for a newly opened offshore account containing a significant amount of money. And there was a copy of a document he had asked her to sign, a power of attorney, just in case something happened to him. It was identical to the one he had asked me to sign months earlier. The full picture of his endgame finally, horrifyingly clicked into place. He wasn't just a bigamist, he was a predator. His plan was monstrously simple. He was going to fake his own death. He would use one of our identities, likely mine, the one with no family to ask questions, as the deceased. He would use his power of attorney to cash in the $5 million life insurance policy. Then he would disappear with his other family to a new country with a new name and a fortune built on the ashes of a life he had deliberately destroyed. Hiking trip, my mountain road. It was the perfect stage for a tragic accident, but he wasn't planning on being the victim. He was planning on creating one. We sat in the fading afternoon light of the park, two women whose lives had been a lie, the truth, a shared, devastating weight between us. The man we had both loved, the man we had both mourned, was a monster. He hadn't just betrayed us. He had been preparing to erase one of us for profit. What do we do now? Sophia whispered, her eyes red-rimmed, her face a mask of grief and disbelief. The first time since this nightmare began, I felt a sense of clarity. The anger and the grief were still there, but they were now forged into a cold, hard purpose. We live, I said, my voice firm. We refuse to be his victims. We refuse to let his lies be the final chapter of our stories. In the weeks that followed, Sophia and I formed an unlikely, powerful alliance. We were two strangers bound by a shared trauma, the only two people on Earth who understood the true depth of his deception. Together, we began the painful process of untangling the web of his lies. We hired a lawyer, a sharp, compassionate woman who specialized in cases of fraud. We presented her with the evidence, the two sets of documents, the two insurance policies, the two powers of attorney, the plane tickets. The lawyer was stunned. She said it was the most audacious case of long-con fraud she had ever seen. The legal battle was messy and complicated, but the evidence was overwhelming. We were able to nullify the insurance policies and the powers of attorney. We discovered that Liam, or James, was a ghost. The identity he had used with me, Liam Callahan, was a complete fabrication built on the stolen identity of a man who had died years ago. His identity as James Alistair was his real one, but his entire professional life was a sham, a house of cards built on charm and forged documents. The most difficult part was telling. Whoa, how do you tell a 5-year-old boy that the father he worshipped was a phantom, a bad man who had hurt people? Sophia handled it with a grace and strength that I found awe-inspiring. She told him that his father had been a man with a sick heart who had gotten lost and that he wouldn't be coming back. It was a kinder, gentler version of the truth, a myth to protect a child, just as my mother had once tried to protect me. Sophia and I sold both apartments, the two stages for his elaborate play. We pooled our resources. We had both been victims of his financial manipulations, but together we had enough to start over. We decided to leave the city, a place that was haunted by his memory at every turn. We bought a small house in a quiet coastal town a few hours away, a place with clean air and the sound of the ocean. We started a new life, not as romantic partners, but as family. A strange, broken, and beautiful family, forged in the fires of a shared betrayal. I became Aunt Chloe to Leo, a quiet, steady presence in his life. I found a job illustrating children's books, my art, once a solitary pursuit, now filled with a new sense of purpose. Sophia, a talented graphic designer, started her own freelance business. There are still days when a memory of Liam will surface, a ghost from a life that feels like it belonged to someone else. And the pain is still there, a dull ache in the background of my life. But it no longer defines me. One evening, about a year after we had moved, Sophia and I were sitting on our back porch, watching Leo chase fireflies in the twilight. Do you ever wonder, she asked quietly, if any of it was real? The love, I thought for a moment, watching the small, bright lights of the fireflies dance in the darkness. I think the love we felt was real, I said finally. Our love was real. He was the forgery. And in the end, that's all he was. A collection of lies that fell apart under the weight of the truth. She nodded, a sad, understanding smile on her face. We sat in a comfortable silence, two survivors who had found in each other's shared wreckage an unexpected, resilient strength. The keys that had unlocked so much pain and betrayal had, in the end, unlock something else entirely. They had unlocked a door I never knew existed, a door that led me away from a life that was a perfect, beautiful lie and towards a messy, complicated, and authentic future. It had led me to my true family,